Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat sermon by Rabbi Adam Kligfeld.
Is there anyone in the room who knows how to say snail in Hebrew? Snail. Shablul. It's a great word, shablul. It almost sounds like an onomatopoeia, as if your mouth has to kind of go through the curls of the voice in order to get the word out. It almost looks like a snail in my head when I say the word shablul in Hebrew. Now that may sound like a totally bizarre way to begin a Dvar Torah in Parshat Yitro, but just hold that in your back pocket a bit, that the word for snail in Hebrew is shablul. As we mentioned several times this morning, and as Adam read so beautifully, it's in Parshat Yitro that the Jewish people is exposed to the primary aspect of the revelation at Sinai, and that is the Ten Commandments. And the order and the content of the Ten Commandments has been something that's been studied by Western civilization of many religious backgrounds since we were first handed it those thousands of years ago. And one of the ways in which the Ten Commandments is understood is through the categories of the different mitzvot that are represented in those 10. Because some of them seem to be mitzvot, obligations that relate to our interactions with one another, and some of them seem to be mitzvot that relate to our interactions with the Holy One. According to Rabbi Umberto Cassuto, who was a late 19th century, early 20th century Italian commentator, and one of the first of those to bring together both academic, modern scholarship, and a very, very traditional understanding of Torah study. He makes a very interesting statement about the fifth commandment. The fifth commandment, kabed et avicha v'et imecha, to honor your mother and your father. And what he says is that fifth commandment serves as a fulcrum, as a transition from the first few commandments of the 10 that seem to be entirely about our relationship with God. Only I am the Lord your God. Don't have one, only have one, don't have no gods before me, do not take my name in vain. To the next set of commandments that all have to do with how we treat our fellow, our reah. Do not murder, do not steal, do not bear false witness against. And what Cassuto says about that is that the parents serve as a transition in this moment of the Ten Commandments because the parents are the people in your life who are most, both like you and most like God. They are the people in your life who actually serve as the transition between you and the heavenly realm. Whether or not we want to admit it, particularly during our teenage and our adolescent years, our parents are human, they have feelings, they are flawed, they make mistakes, they get stubborn, they have joy, they have needs, they have regrets. They are like all the other re'im around us. In some ways, they're no different than any other human being. But because they are the ones who brought us into life, they were, as the Talmud rhapsodizes about, God's partners in the creation of our existence. They are more other and deep in our consciousness than we can possibly imagine. And our tradition gives a nod to that in many places. Not only are we obligated to honor them in the Ten Commandments, when our parents pass away, our obligation is to mourn them, not the 30 days that every other relative that we mourn for is upon us as an obligation, but for 12 months saying Kaddish for 11 months. Because to witness the end of the life of the one who gave you life is a reminder that they are the transition for you between the world beyond which we can't possibly fully fathom, the world of God, and this world in which we live. And so Cassuto is basically saying that our parents are demigods on some level. They represent the heaven and the earth. They are flesh and blood, but they're your closest connection to the concept of something being created from nothing, which is an aspect of God. They are your closest contact to the miracle and to the wonder of life. I wonder what it would be like, more often than we do, even and especially during those teenage years, to walk around the world with that awareness. Not that your parents are perfect, because they're not, but that they touch the transcendent and they were partners with God in your creation. What's interesting about that is, are we supposed to be relating to our parents that way as an exception to a rule, different than we relate to any other person with whom we encounter, or as an opening to see everyone in that category? What would it be like to walk through the world, and every time we saw a human being, whether a friend or a family member or a stranger, what would it mean for us to actually feel for their humanity, to experience their frailty, to be in touch with their mortality, their vulnerability, and also their touch of divinity, the piece of them which, like our parents, also can only come from God. To truly see every person we encounter as having, along with us, a common creator. I don't know about you, but I'm finding that harder than it used to be. I'm finding it harder than it used to be to see that duality generously in every person I encounter. It seems to be an era in which there are more people towards whom we struggle proffering that spiritual generosity, of seeing them as godlike on some level, certainly emerging from God, and seeing them as real human beings with needs. We are all deep in our bunkers. We are all deep in our protecting of ourselves. We are all coiled up on some level, which brings me back to the snail. My dear friend Rabbi Barry Katz recently came back from Israel, and this is a scholar of the Hebrew language, and he said on this trip he learned a new Hebrew word. Hebrew slang is developing at an incredible pace. There might be people in this room who already know this word. He says he heard this phrase being used on the streets. He had never heard it before, describing people as mishtablelim, which you can't really translate in English, all snailed up. It's a reflexive verb made from the word shablul, which means snail. Lehishtablel means to be all coiled up and curled up as a snail, protected by your outer external shell. Everyone is experiencing a version of that in the state of Israel. And one of the pieces of evidence that he was exposed to, those of you who have been around Jewish culture and certainly Israeli culture for many decades know that one of the most amazing things about how our people have responded in the past to travail and to war is to compose new songs whose themes were about peace. Every era that saw bloodshed and terror and murder, Israeli songwriters and citizens found a way through those clouds to compose music, to invite the entire society to sing and to dream about peace, because we always hoped for it and we never surrendered it. There's been an explosion of poetry and song since October 7th. Particularly for our people, a remarkably small percentage of them have been about shalom. It's as if it's too far away on the horizon. We are too mishtablelim. We are too curled up in our snail-like existence to imagine emerging from our shell and fantasizing about and doing the things that bring about the possibility of peace. There and here, we are circling wagons, We're seeing our own virtues and others' flaws, especially if we disagree about the world and the Middle East and politics and America. We're seeing that even in our parents at times. We are seeing that even in our children at times. This is where Rabbi Umberto Cassuto's challenge must motivate us the most. Rabbi Katz made an interesting association with that verb lihishtablel. That very scene that Adam read through before, the cataclysm at Sinai, must have been terrifying. To actually experience it must have been something that would have sent the average, recently freed Israelite slave deep into their shell. Rabbi Katz imagines that all the Israelites at the foot of the mountain were mishtablim. How could that experience have not fried the senses and made you nervous about what might be coming next and made you pull up your defenses to protect yourself? And what's interesting about that is that the first reminder that the Israelites get after the scene of the Ten Commandments, which we read at the very end of the Torah reading, the first thing the Israelites are asked to do after they experience that thunder and that lightning is God says, make me an altar. And not just a regular altar, mizbach adama. Make the altar out of dirt, out of earth, out of something humble and soft and supple. And if you make this altar with stone, the Torah says, it has to be unhewn, with no metal having been wielded against it, no iron having been brought to it to shape it into the shape that you want, because you can't bring iron and weaponry to your sanctuary, because your sanctuary is supposed to be a place where the thing that is experienced and the thing that is produced is not war but peace, not distrust but openness, not being all curled up, but opening yourself and your soul to as many experiences as you can. It's in your sanctuary where you unfurl from your snail-like curl. And what does the Torah next say in the next verse as to what's going to happen in that sanctuary? They're going to build with unhewn stone or with earth. V'zavachta alav et olotecha, you will slaughter on that altar all of the sacrifices that go all the way up to the heavens. V'et shelamecha, your peace offerings, the ones that you offer to the world, that you say even in the hardest of moments, today, even today, I remain open to your humanity, and I remain open to the possibility of peace. It's the only way back, eventually, from this dark space that so many of us find ourselves in. To see all the people, not just your parents, around you as humans, deeply flawed, but also extraordinarily kissed by the divine. May that be the eyes through which we see the world today and tomorrow, in this sanctuary of peace and everywhere.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.